So now it is my pleasure to introduce Ashleigh Bryant Phillips. Ashleigh is from Woodland, North Carolina. Her debut collection, Sleepovers, was published by Hub City Press and won the C. Michael Curtis Short Story Book Prize. Her stories have appeared in the Paris Review, the Oxford American, and elsewhere. Sleepovers was on the New Yorker's What We're Reading This Summer list, among other lists, and has been hailed by Lauren Groff as fully committed to the truth, no matter how dark or difficult or complicated it might be, and written with incantatory crispness. Ashleigh will be joined in conversation this evening by Juliet Escoria. Juliet is the author of the poetry collection Witch Hunt, the story collection Black Cloud, and the novel Juliet the Maniac. Juliet the Maniac was called dazzling by the New York Times and was voted most anticipated novel of 2019 by both Bustle and Nylon. She's joining us from West Virginia. Both of these books are available for purchase from malaprops.com. We are thrilled to welcome these authors here this evening, and take it away, Juliet and Ashleigh.
So we were going to discuss one story in particular. So I think, Ashleigh, do you want to read from it first before we start blabbing?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Stephanie, for the introduction. Thank you for Tricia for being like behind the scenes as our techie for tonight. Yeah, we're gonna talk about The Virgin, which if you have your book at home and want to read along, it's on page 153, and I'm just gonna read just the beginning of it. And I like to stand up when I read, so I'm gonna take out my headphones. Okay, can you hear me? Okay. The Virgin. When I wake up, my iPhone won't turn on, and the nearest Apple place is in Norfolk at the mall, and that's an hour and a half away. I put on a bright lipstick, brush my hair, and rub my wrist with one of them perfume samples from the paper. It's spicy and sweet. On the ride there, my car pulls to the right. My right tire's been leaking air for a while now. The radio plays When Doves Cry by Prince. Before Weston left me, he put me in handcuffs and held my head underwater in the bathtub. I would have done anything for him. I pass fields, and then the fields turn into nice houses and traffic. In the parking deck, the car beside me has brand new tires. I run my fingers over the treads. I've never had much money. This iPhone Weston gave me is the only nice thing I really got. I can't afford to heat my house. I don't have any friends. Bree and the rest of them stopped talking to me when Weston moved us across the river. The people in the mall move in clusters. They huddle outside the Cheesecake Factory. They're wearing clothes like what's on the mannequins. Their shoes look new too. The only house we could afford across the river was an old mill house. It's been sitting there abandoned for 3 years before we moved in. Neighborhood kids came in and kicked the railing out the staircase. They wrote "fuck" on the dining room wall. Birds built nests in the ceiling fans. Every night I sleep under 6 blankets and wear 2 sweaters, pants, and socks. I have 1 electric heater and I blast it towards my head. And I hope these folks in the mall can't see that when they look at me. The man at the Apple store who helps me is named Chris. The store is real busy. Lots of folks are talking and walking around. Sometimes when Weston's friends would come to visit, he'd film me having sex with them. "Come for me, baby," he'd say. I didn't want to be with anyone but him.
Me and Chris look down at my iPhone on the table in front of us. I just need this fixed, please, I say. Chris says he understands. I'd like for him to hug me. I tell him I don't have much money. I tell him I sweep hair at a salon. It's okay, Chris says. Then he looks me in the eye and says, we're gonna get you straight. Chris takes my iPhone with him and goes away for a while. I pull my pants up from where they're getting big on me and touch my lips to see if my lipstick's still there, and it is, but I can feel it getting dry and flaky. It doesn't take long for Chris to come back with a new iPhone. Looks like it was a manufacturing malfunction. Unfortunately, your phone was a bad egg, he says, but fortunately, it's still under warranty. You're getting a brand new phone for free. He takes the new iPhone out of the box. I tell him how thankful I am. I tell him how much I appreciate it. I'll just need your password to get you set up, Chris says. Weston, I say real quick, like it don't mean nothing. Chris looks at me and then back at the phone. So let's see, that makes it 937866, I say. While everything's syncing up, Chris asks me if I like sweeping hair. He says it sounds relaxing. Then he asks me where I'm from. The way you say some of your words, it's different. I think it's pretty cool, he says. Well, this is how everybody talks back home, I say. I feel flattered. But when I tell him where I'm from, of course, he's never heard of it. Nobody ever has. Well, before you head back, he says, you should check out the art museum. It's free, and I go there on my days off. Chris's hands look kind. They look gentle. They're big, and he has dark hair on his knuckles. It's a really special spot, he says. I think you'll like it. I've never been to an art museum before, but I tell him I'll check it out. He smiles at me and tells me it was nice to meet me. He wishes me a safe drive home and tells me to enjoy the museum. I tell him goodbye and go wander around the beauty section in Dillard's. I find the perfume like what I'm wearing on display and spray some more on. I find a new color of Estee Lauder lipstick that I like, and I put that on too. It's called Bold Innocent. A woman behind the counter with shiny skin tells me how pretty my complexion is. She wants to give me a free beauty consultation, but I tell her I'm shy and walk away. I don't like strangers to touch me. On the way to the car, I pass the food court and see Chris ordering a smoothie. He puts his hair back in a ponytail while he waits for it. When they call his name, he smiles and waves his hand up. That's me, he says. It's a blue smoothie. Blueberries, I guess. Thank you.
I'll unmute myself. Okay, so you want to get into it, Ashleigh?
Yeah.
Let you put the stuff in your ears.
Yeah, no, I realized I just glanced up at the screen when I was done reading, and I realized the whole time I was talking, all y'all could see was was that, which is funny.
I liked the effect. Okay. So that story, I picked it. I mean, I liked it. That was the main reason. I liked it a lot. But it was like, kind of showed two different things that I feel like are going through a lot of the collection. And one was just kind of like this subtle ache of loneliness that I think is pretty universal. And then also the way, it didn't seem like you had like a specific thing that you were saying, which I liked. I don't like it when things feel like they're trying to make you think a certain way. But just kind of about the divide between two worlds, the world of iPhones stores or Apple stores and museums, and then the world of nursing homes and potholes and that type of thing. And as far as I'm aware of, there's not even a word for like putting down rural people. Like there's not like a ruralism that I'm aware of, which seems odd to me, that sometimes it's like lumped into classism, but that's not right. And this is the only like paragraph long question that I'm gonna ask. And so is that like something you're kind of thinking about illustrating throughout the book and the story? And I guess, like, why do you think that's important? Just that kind of stuff.
For sure. I love that you say there's no word for ruralism, classism. Yeah, putting down rural people. Maybe the word can just be, well, I don't know, it would be an awful word to say, but something like neglect or, yeah, just a total ignoring of a whole region, specifically the South. The South has more rural places that are strangled by poverty than any other region in America. And I just so happened to be born in one of those counties whose that is strangled by poverty. And yeah, I fortunately was able to leave, but only under the weight of student debt that allowed me to go to college. And once I got to college, I discovered short stories, and a whole new world culturally opened up to me. But I never really saw anybody in my second world kind of like talking about my first world, which was my home. And when they were talking about it, it was all a joke or a reason why Trump got elected. And I wanted to kind of start that conversation between the two worlds, because I knew when I wrote this book that a lot of people back home weren't going to read it. And I knew that because there's no bookstore in the county. A lot of people there have dyslexia that's never treated. They just get passed through school. I didn't grow up in a literary household, literary being like reading books. My daddy had undiagnosed dyslexia his whole life. But anyway, I knew that people in the literary world, people who did live outside of rural communities, but there's also people in the literary world that live in rural communities or live in off the road places like you do in Beckley, West Virginia. And I know that those people were going to be reading it. And if I could get them, just anybody really, to start thinking about what it's like to live in such an isolated, forgotten place, that would be good. Because the struggles of rural people and how they're strangled by poverty and everything that wraps into that. It's not only poverty, but it's, education is under that, mental health is under that, kind of like there's all sorts of abuse happening within all of that. Anyway, yeah, this is something that I did want to address with the collection. So thank you.
Yeah, because I grew up in a big city and lived in a big city until I moved to West Virginia. And a lot of the things that you just talked about were things that I was unaware of. And it's like we talk about country people, rural people as being ignorant, but I think there's like ignorance that city people have too, because like it didn't even occur to me that some of my students had never been to an art museum until I'd been teaching for a while. I teach at a community college, and so I deal with students that have undiagnosed or untreated dyslexia, like all sorts of things that I hadn't, encountered myself. And then the iPhone Apple Store thing was funny to me because I brought my iPhone to an Apple Store in a big city and I had to wait for the battery to arrive. and she like didn't believe me that there was no Apple store near me, and she like pulled it up on the map, and there was a big void of Apple stores, which I knew. And so just like a very kind of like a lot of things that people don't even think about until they're placed there, or don't think about at all, really.
Yeah, and I wrote this story after I moved back home after my MFA, and I woke up one morning and my iPhone was dead. And I had to drive to Norfolk, Virginia, which is like 2 hours in a rainstorm to get the iPhone repaired. And that was kind of scary, because what would happen to you if you got in a wreck in the rainstorm driving 2 hours to get there? But anyway, yeah. It's real problems. It's real problems that aren't talked about, and for some reason aren't amplified, and I don't think that's right.
Yeah, me neither, because it really does affect kind of your next step after high school, and then even more so than that, just like what else you might even think about as a possibility for yourself, much less know how to get through those hoops to do that. And I mean, like, you going into student debt, like knowing how to go in student debt, like I feel like a lot of people wouldn't even know how to do that. Not that that's a good thing, but sometimes it's a means to an end. What were you thinking of when you first started writing this story? Was it like the Apple Store drive, or was there something else that was just kind of the thing that made you decide you were going to write this particular story?
I was trying to get over a bad relationship, for one thing. I was trying to alleviate myself of that. And then in the midst of that, I woke up one morning, like I said, in my cold house. I was unemployed. It was very hard for me to find work when I moved back home, because I was overqualified for everything. But then there weren't any jobs available anyway. But it was an amalgamation of the two. But then also I had moved home to take care of my daddy, who was dying of Alzheimer's. So every day I was driving to the memory care unit to feed him supper. And I was building relationships with there were two women in particular that really liked me at his memory care unit. And the ending scene is from a conversation that I had with them while they were getting their medicine at night. One of them literally joked that it was their birth control pills, which I thought, I was like, this is magnificent. Like, I have to, this is happening in my real life. I have to use this somehow. And when I first started writing the story, I had no idea we were going to end up at the memory care unit, but I just threw it in there because I thought it would work. And I liked that. In real life, I did not pop a tire coming home, but I have popped many a tire before. So yeah, it made sense to me.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was wondering too, because I saw it as kind of like three pieces. You have the Apple Store, you have the bad relationship, and then you have what I saw as a nursing home, but memory care center. And I was just wondering how it makes sense to me. I feel like that's kind of what I do too, where it's just like, you don't know you're going to end up there, but then it makes sense for some reason that's maybe difficult to articulate. It just works in your brain.
Yeah. And too, like when I did go to get my iPhone repaired, he did tell me to go to the art museum, which I had never been to the art museum in Norfolk. Come to find out, it's really magnificent. And so all of that was just kind of like my observations through the point of view of that character of the Chrysler Art Museum.
Yeah, I thought the character interaction with Chris was really neat, because I feel like a lesser writer might want Chris to be a jerk and like judge her, but instead he's just really nice and is like, why don't you do this? I like your accent, but not in a condescending way.
Yeah.
So did you just take that from life, or why did you decide to have him be such a nice guy, positive interaction?
The character in real life was so nice. Like, like in real life, I really wanted him to hug me. And he was just such a very tall, calming, grounding presence. So I don't know if Chris at the MacArthur Mall Apple store will ever read Sleepovers, but if he does, I think he's a very nice person.
I thought so too. It was very good customer service, above and beyond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I got a free iPhone that day too, which surprised me because it was still under warranty. Like that blew my mind as well.
Yeah. So another thing that I was thinking of is just kind of like her loneliness, and like what I was talking about, just kind of like this subtle ache.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that's like the character's age or her location, or are you thinking that is just kind of more like a universal experience that everyone has at some point, is just kind of like this, continual low grade pain of like
Mm-hmm.
feeling lonely and disconnected?
I think it's kind of like all of the above. I think you can feel lonely and disconnected no matter where you are, but sometimes at different points in your life, a certain place can feel heavier than another place. And for the character Lacey here, not only is she going through a breakup and trying to forget an abusive relationship, but unfortunately she's living alone across the river from all of her friends. She's like isolated. So there's I think she would be sad in any circumstance, but because of the actual place that she's living alone in this house and she's isolated from her family, unfortunately as a result from the abusive relationship, Weston.
Yeah. What conditions did you write the story? And you said you were writing it when you had moved back home.
Yeah.
And like, do you remember like what you were listening to, or where exactly you wrote it, what you were looking at, what you were thinking about, that type of thing?
Well, the first thing I wrote was I got in the car at the MacArthur Mall parking deck, and I wrote down everything I could remember about how nice Chris was, about the hair on his knuckles. That was the first thing I wrote down. And talking about it now and looking back at it now, I myself was extremely lonely and just needed comfort. So it makes sense that that's the first thing that I would want to write down. But then later, a couple days later when I got home, the story kind of unfurled from there. I was living in a house that had been abandoned for 3 years. When I moved in, I did clean out birds' nests from the ceiling fans. Fuck wasn't written on the dining room wall, but could have been. But the stairwell definitely had been kicked out. The railings on the staircase had been kicked out. I didn't have much money at all, and it was very hard to keep the house heated. So I wrote this story under those conditions while living alone. And I was listening to I was listening to so much music during that time. When you live alone, you listen to so much, or I do anyway. I listen to so much music. But during that time, I was listening to When Doves Cry by Prince, which is mentioned in the story. I mean, I was listening to a slew of other things too, but that for sure. And I was trying to write it like a Larry Brown story, kind of. Have you ever read much of his stories?
I don't think so. I don't know. No, I don't think I have.
Have you read like a Raymond Carver story?
Yes, I have.
Okay, so to me, in my opinion, Larry Brown is like a larger hearted Southern twang version of Raymond Carver. And I think Larry Brown would like that because he really admired Raymond Carver's work. But Larry Brown has huge hearts for his characters. He never shows any judgment. So anyway, I tried to write it as Larry would write a short story.
Yeah, not knowing, I was like trying to think because my brain feels like it's like alphabet soup where everything's scrambled up, but it's there. But knowing Raymond Carver, like that was another thing I thought was really neat. And like I feel like the best stories are where you see these things and you're not sure how they work, but you know that they do.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the things in there, like there's parts, like she remembers a lot with Weston, but then there's other parts where like the dog, she remembers the dog that she once
Mm-hmm.
had at one part, and another time she remembers going fishing with Weston and catching a shark.
Right.
And how do those get in the story, and how do you decide that those belong in the story?
Well, as I was writing it, they were revealed to me, and when I was writing it, I was like, you know what? These are kind of like sharp details that a reader is going to remember after the fact. And sometimes when you throw in those really amazing, great, sharp details, they do distract from what you're really trying to get the reader to look at. But in those cases with the dog, I thought that really showed how Lacey craved comfort, because what she remembered from that dog was I think like rolling around with it and having fun with it, and that it was like a sense of comfort for her. So I thought that worked. And then with the shark, catching the shark, fishing with Weston, I don't know, I was like, maybe this is a cool kind of like old school ominous kind of thing. I don't know. I thought that worked okay. But yeah, I liked that she caught the shark, because we don't really know what Weston caught, but we definitely know that he didn't catch the shark. And the fact that she did, that's like more magnificent than anything he could have ever caught.
Yeah, I felt like it could be read as a metaphor, but not like a heavy-handed metaphor.
Right.
Like one that could be interpreted multiple ways.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is when they're working the best, is when it's not like they have one definitive meaning.
Mm-hmm.
So the narrator, first she tells the truth to the people, and then she ends up lying to them. And so was that taken from life, or was that like a fictional choice that you made of her ending up lying to these sweet old people?
Yeah. I don't know, like, I guess personally, I was writing from the point of view that I wish I had never been in the awful relationship I had been in. And by having Lacey say that she was a virgin, that was some way of eradicating that whole relationship. But also having spent time with many people suffering with Alzheimer's, there's something really magical about living in a reality that isn't happening now. You can make up anything and they'll believe it, pretty much. It's you're playing. It's often like you're playing. And I just thought, if Lacey would play with these two women and this elderly man that she's eating with, if she were to play with these memory care patients, what would she want her character to be? And I think she would want to be a virgin in the end, ultimately. At first, yeah, it would be great to be married to Chris, because she's like obsessed with him from the iPhone visit. But ultimately, in the end, I think she would rather just be a virgin.
What you described, it seems kind of perfect for like a fiction writer, of just like being able to write things, try things out as you're talking.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So the character of Weston, maybe I'm just messed up, but I felt like that was like really relatable, of just maybe not necessarily something so abusive and toxic, but some guy or girl, I guess too, in your life, usually when you're younger, where it's just like you become fixated on them even though you sort of hate them, and you know, or maybe you don't know, that they're not worth your time. And just her like ruminating over him, I thought was really relatable, and also just kind of like interesting in terms of like human behavior. So is that something you were thinking about too, or?
Yeah. No, because I've seen so many friends go through relationships like this. If you've never been through a relationship like this, then God, you have dodged the bullet and consider yourself very lucky. But for those of us who have gone through this, some of us have gone through them multiple times. Even though the relationship described in the story between Weston and Lacey is extreme, I feel like if you are in an abusive relationship on any level, you could be able to relate to any, you may not feel like you were handcuffed and being held underwater. Like that may not have happened to you, but it may have felt like you were being handcuffed and held underwater. That's what I meant to say. Yeah, some of those details were actually derived from a Lifetime documentary I was watching about a woman who, I think she ended up murdering the guy. But anyway, my mama was definitely concerned after she read that story. She called me on the phone and she said, I just want to know, like, were you ever in anything this bad? And I said, no, don't you remember that Lifetime show we watched? And then she remembered. So yeah.
I think that's one of like the pitfalls of writing fiction that has details from real life, is like people in my life, at least, they think like because something's real then everything's real. And it's not like you can like flag in your book like this is made up, because a lot of times I don't even remember what I made up and what I stole from real life. So
right, because in the end, once you start putting it all together, the reason that you remembered the things that didn't actually happen to you, you remembered them because you felt like they happened to you for some reason.
You sit there and imagine them happening and like how that would feel and that type of thing. And it starts like reality starts to feel kind of like plastic, and that's weird but cool. I like that. Have you had to like explain to your mom much stuff like that, or was that the one thing?
That was the one she was most concerned about, but other than that, she's big fan of the collection.
Well, that's good. It's always nice when the parent gives you like the stamp of approval.
Yeah. But oh my God, any show on Lifetime is just full of inspiration.
I like that.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you some more kind of just like general questions too. So when you first started at college, like what do you remember like thinking? What surprised you? What were you just kind of like, whoa, I didn't know people did this type of thing?
This is kind of a silly story, but it's true. Because, well, I mean, it makes sense. So the county that I grew up in North Carolina, it has more deer and wildlife per square mile than people. So I grew up, I guess, with nature and farm fields more than anything. And when I went to college, it was our first week of like orientation, and like our little orientation group leader, she said she was going to take us across the street to Ben and Jerry's to get ice cream. And I had seen Ben and Jerry's before. I knew what that was, but I had never been to one, a real one, like standalone Ben and Jerry's before. So I was excited about that. Even more excited that it was across the street from my college. That blew my mind, because Ben and Jerry's was a thing to get when we traveled outside our county. But now they do sell it in Food Line, which is, well, shit, that's still not even in my county. But anyway, they sell it at Food Line. Anyway, so we're in our little group. It's like, 5 of us, and we're walking across the street about to head out of the campus, and we're at the crosswalk, and there's this very high-pitched chirp that's happening, and I don't know what that is. And I say to the girls around me, I'm like, what kind of bird is that? Do y'all know what kind of bird that is? Because how I grew up, we knew if a bird made a sound, we were like, okay, that's a bobwhite, that's a robin. We knew what it was. And it was really important to know those things. It was important to know what kind of trees, what kind of plants, what kind of crops, what kind of birds, what kind of animals. And then they all just started laughing at me because it wasn't a bird at all. It was, a sound at the crosswalk, so that non-seeing people knew it was safe to cross the street. So that's kind of a silly example, but I think it just goes to show you how much I had to learn and how much I did learn. But I was very surprised that a lot of I went to a women's college, and I was very surprised that a lot of the people on my dorm room hall, folks I met, like, they did not eat with their whole family once a week. Like, they only saw their cousins and stuff at Christmas. And I saw my cousins at least once a week, every week, every Sunday at church.
That was the type of family I grew up in. Was like summers and Christmas is when you saw the extended family.
Yeah, and it blew my mind that for a lot of people, and I guess most people, family is just your mom and your dad and whatever siblings you have. Aunts and uncles live in faraway places. Cousins live in faraway places. That blew my mind.
Yeah, you're talking about like two, I guess are the main things that I really like about living in a smaller town is just like a connection to the actual world around you in terms of like seasons, birds, crops, etc. And then also just like how big a part family plays, not just your parents or your brother, your sister, but your whole entire family plays in a person's life. And like we had the whole nature thing to an extent growing up in California. In New York, it felt like completely non-existent, but I feel like maybe it's just me, but it feels like my body or head or something kind of like craved that. And when I got here and was able to kind of, fully see that and experience it more, it seems like healthier for me to.
Yeah. And now you're a gardener, and you're like sending me pictures of your dahlias and stuff that are blooming.
Yeah, and I don't know. There's like a Bell Hooks essay in the English 101 textbook that just talks about how important it is, particularly for people of color, to be in the dirt. But I think that's important for everyone, or maybe not everyone, but important for me at very least, is just touching the earth, which is the name of the essay in the English 101 thing.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I love teaching that to my students because it's the one thing that we can really relate on. Is I'm like, I like touching dirt, and you do too.
I'm sure they love that.
Yeah, it's fun to like force bell hooks upon them in a very like covert type of way.
No, that's good.
Yeah,
that's good.
What's it like to do a book tour on Zoom?
Well, at first I was very, very uncomfortable with it because when I started reading any creative work at all, I read them on a stage in front of people, and I really loved that. I loved that so much. And maybe it's because I'm a Leo and love the attention and being dramatic like that, but I really I loved that a lot. So I was very scared about doing readings on Zoom. Like, if you would have told me a couple years ago that I would only be reading like a little tiny bit of the first part of that story, I would have said no. I have to read the thing in the entirety. But you gotta roll with the punches, and I'm trying to keep a real like Zen attitude about it all. This has been great. Like, it's definitely better if I know the person before we do the Zoom together, because that makes me feel more comfortable. It's extremely awkward being in conversation with someone you've never met in your whole life over Zoom. But other than that, I'm just grateful we have Zoom, I guess, because if we didn't have that, then I don't know. There's something kind of neat thinking that folks are tuning into this kind of like they would, I don't know, an interview on a late night TV show. That's how I'm trying to look at it, you know? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I've been trying to like find reasons why life on Zoom isn't horrible. And I think it's cool that I don't have to leave my house to like watch readings and do this, because normally I'm kind of excluded from any sort of like literary quote unquote community. So that's definitely a positive. And it's like less nerve-wracking for me asking you questions than if I was on a stage, because as a Virgo, readings tend to make me like really nervous, and this like doesn't seem scary to me.
Oh, cool.
So finally, before we get to audience questions, I asked you beforehand, what are some things that you've consumed lately that you really liked? And by consume, I mean you can do food, different types of media, books, movies, TV shows, articles, whatever.
I'm glad that you asked this, because earlier today, on Twitter, which Twitter can be really good, but then also really bad. So I'm lucky I found a very wonderful Twitter gem earlier today. Brianna Younger, she rounded up a bunch of Black music writers from the South and Black essayists from the South and asked them, okay, what are your favorite Southern rap albums? And today NPR published that, and it is incredible. And it's even more significant because today is I don't know whatever anniversary it is, but in 1995 at the Source Awards, Outkast won Best New Artist. And at that point, the rap game was only East Coast, West Coast. No one gave any care about the South. And here they were coming up, you know, from Atlanta and creating some of the most distinctly strange music. I mean, completely revolutionary. And they won Best New Artist. And that night at the Source Awards, everyone was booing them. And then Andre 3000 got up there and he accepted the award, and he was like, the South got something to say. And that's what the name of this NPR collective that was published today is called, The South Got Something to Say. So it's very cool that it was published today.
Yeah, I watched, there's a documentary series on Netflix about hip hop, and they played that scene, and I remember that.
Oh my God.
And just being like, ha ha ha, like it's not just East Coast, West Coast, there's like this whole country of different styles of hip hop and rap. And
yeah, and what's amazing too is that the article, it says some of the most powerful stuff, but it was like basically, you know, how can you dismiss a certain genre as additive when in fact the South has given you the blues and rock and roll and everything that's ever been foundational about American music. I don't know, that was amazing. So I loved that. And they highlighted some North Carolina artists too which was exciting. So I was very into that earlier today, and I think everyone should check it out. But then last night I watched this movie by Kelly Reichardt. Do you know her?
I don't think so, but that doesn't mean anything.
she's a female director, and she directed this film called First Cow, and it takes place, I think it's in Montana, during the gold rush, and that was really good, really, really, really good. And then I found out that she made a movie based off of a collection of short stories. And so now I'm like dreaming. Oh, Joey said the movie took place in Oregon, not Montana. Oregon during the gold rush. Back home, I did not learn that much about Western history. I'll tell you that. I just learned most about Southern history. So sorry.
Mine was the reverse.
Yeah.
I learned a lot about the gold rush.
Yeah, okay. But it's a fantastic movie. I love her films. She's like a poet with she's like, yeah, she is. She's like a poet with how she chooses what images she decides to show in her movies. But I found out she did a film that's a collection, well, it's a interpretation of collection of short stories. And so now I want to send her a collection of Sleepovers. So now I'm going to stalk to find her address. Yeah.
That sounds really good. I feel the need to watch that now.
Yeah, it's really fun. I feel like any foodie would enjoy it as well, because it strangely revolves around food. But anyone who's also had a best friend would love it too. It's about friendship as well.
Cool.
And a cow, of course. Anybody who's agricultural would enjoy it. So many levels to get into this film.
So do we want to do audience questions now?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to step in for that part. I just want to start by thanking you both so much, Ashleigh, Juliet. I could just listen to y'all talk however long you wanted to. Yeah, I'm absolutely delighted about everything, in particular what's come up in the last few minutes. And I'll just say, this is one of the reasons why not everyone knows, I think, why it's a fun thing to go and listen to authors talk. You know, I feel like that may be something that not everyone has discovered. And this is why. Because you're thinking about all kinds of things all the time, and can talk about them in ways that are thoroughly entertaining, in addition to writing about them in ways that are thoroughly entertaining. So thank you for that. So I'm going to remind everyone to ask questions. Also point out to those of you who are not looking at the chat that Patricia has been posting links to the NPR article that Ashleigh so energetically recommended a minute ago. The link is there, and also a link for First Cow is there. And Larry Brown came up earlier. You can find a link to his obituary there in the chat. And also, if y'all don't mind sharing a little bit of airspace, recommend Tiny Love, which is the short story collection of Larry Brown's that was published posthumously last year before last.
Yeah.
Linear time is messing with me right now with the pandemic, so yeah. So really enjoyed the conversation. Chime in with questions, y'all. Start with the queue. There's a sample up at the top of the chat. And while the rest of you are coming up with some questions, I'll start with one of my own, which is kind of just a little bit of a process question, because I love reading short stories. And I'm not a writer, but my sense is that it can be just more difficult to write them than to write them well. And I feel like it takes something to really be able to write good short stories. And then the other question that always comes up for me is how the stories that are in a collection end up in that collection. and why, and what other stories might be hanging out on the sidelines that, you know, maybe were destined for that space originally and didn't make it, or are destined for the next thing you put together. So, and if you wouldn't mind just talking about that.
Yeah. Let's see. As far as like knowing that these stories were going to be in here, most of them were all in my thesis from MFA. And then once I graduated, I added whatever new stories I had written when I moved back home, because the Hub City contest I was applying for had a 150 page minimum. So once I threw in the new stories I had written, I was like over 150 pages. The Virgin was one of the new stories I had written. And then once it won the prize and Hub City was going to publish it, they were like, we'd like to make it longer. Are there any more you can throw in? So then at that point, I kind of quickly wrote some to throw in, and they're like shorter ones in this collection, like the Hunting Lodge and Jacuzzi. Those were kind of thrown in after. But then there was a story that was included in the original version that for the final version I cut out, and I cut that one out because that narrator was a pregnant, unwed young woman, and she worked at the Rich Square Market. And I already had 2 instances of young checkout girls. One of them was pregnant, and I was just like, I don't want folks to get confused. And so as much as I loved that story, I cut that. Yeah.
And do you, and of course you know, there's all kinds of things you can continue to write, obviously, but it seems like you feel particularly connected to short story as a form at this point. Yeah, and so do you, and it's not like I'm asking, do you, you know, that you have to jump off into novels necessarily. But now that you have this book out there, I just wonder if that's something you give more thought to, or do you consider yourself at this point anyway, more of a short story writer?
Yeah, well, when the ideas come to me, they come to me as short stories. And I've never had like a novel come into my brain. And I don't know if that's because I've never read a novel that really excited me and clicked with me and gave me the permission. Because I never wrote short stories until I felt like I had permission to write short story. But another thing, it seems to me, about a novel, I mean, unless you go and you write something like As I Lay Dying, that jumps from perspective to perspective, seems to me like I would get bored writing a novel, having to sustain and stay with one character for so long, because I get bored extremely fast and easy. I probably have undiagnosed ADHD, probably. But no, if I could figure out how to write a novel that would intrigue me, I would surely try my hand at it.
That's one of the best answers I've heard to that question.
Cool.
I'm not just saying that. The part about permission in particular, yeah. So we do have a question from the audience, and it's for Ashleigh, but I'd like to have both of you answer if you feel like it. These are always voluntary. And so, what are you reading right now?
I am working through Breakfast of Champions by Kurt Vonnegut. I've never read it before, and he's funny, and I like being able to laugh during this time. in particular, but I'm also revisiting the poems of Layli Long Soldier, who she did that really wonderful collection Whereas, and it came out a couple years ago from Copper Candy Press. But what she does with form and what she does on the page is really, that's exciting to me. But Kurt Vonnegut is exciting to me too, because he's doing all sorts of crazy things in Breakfast of Champions. He's like drawing little baby lambs and all sorts of stuff in there. So what are you reading, Julia?
Last night I finished The Ice Cream Man, this story collection by Sam Pink. And then tonight I was digging through my email as you were answering because I couldn't remember the name of the book. But tonight I'm going to start reading Muriel Sparks' Abbess of Crewe, which Nicolette Pollack recommended to me because I decided I wanted to write about a nun. So I guess that's a nun book. And when I looked it up online, I was like, ooh, that looks interesting. It's a real short, tiny little book. So that's tonight's reading. Oh, and then before that, I read, what's that book called? Sensation Machines by Adam Wilson. I thought that was real funny and fun to read, even though it's really dark.
Thank you both for sharing that. I think people are probably, still taking notes. And Mandy says thank you. So we're coming up on 7 o'clock, and we're out of time, but I wonder if you might, and maybe we just, maybe this is just something for everybody to think about, because I was really struck by the conversation earlier about the lack of a single term for what I'll just call at this point anti-rural bias. Because we hold so many of those biases, and I think there are so many of them that we take for granted as these kinds of organic products of mean people, when in fact they're not. They're more sort of on purpose and exist more to serve interests than we give credit for. And so I guess my question to you is just what you think of a word. And Ashleigh, I think you came up with something earlier, but I'm just wondering what other words there might be for that, and what other areas of bias like that there are that we don't have words for, that exist in the same way, that sort of marginalize in ways that we might not be as aware of. So that's just a think piece. I'm just, oh, Patricia has a question as well. Do you all have a couple of extra minutes?
I do, yes.
Yeah, okay. Patricia, do you want to just hop on and ask yours?
So I graduated from Meredith.
Wow.
And it's very important to always say, hey, Meredith.
Right.
We gotta acknowledge. And I was the first generation to graduate from college, and my parents really hoped that Meredith was going to make me out to be a proper Southern white woman. And so I'm really curious to hear, based on your description, Ashleigh, of your coming to a private women's college like that. What did you think of it? How I mean, we all have our Meredith stories, but the Southern Women's College is really a unique one.
It is. I was I had never had any close relationships with girls growing up. I'd always been a tomboy and been best friends with all the guys. So that was a whole nother ball game. I remember two boys that I grew up with went to NC State, which is a co-ed university right across the street from Meredith. And we had known each other since we were 3 years old. So one night I took a couple girls from my hall, and we went to go visit them at NC State. And I just thought we were going to have fun, like whatever. And then we got back in the car, and the three of them were telling each other which one was their favorite and which one they were going to try to like pursue. And then they were flabbergasted that I didn't feel the same way. That was really strange to me. And then one of them told me later, she joked about it. She said she was getting her MIT degree, which meant mom in training. She was there to find a boy at NC State to marry and, you know, have children. And considering that so many women that do go to Meredith are from rural places where nothing more is expected of them than to get married and have children and be a nice Southern woman, makes sense. But fortunately for me, going to Meredith gave me access to visit museums for the first time, to go to rock shows, to taste Indian food, which I was always getting into all sorts of things, and I was not into the sorority aspect of it. But I did end up in the bathtub ring. I was very reluctant about that. So I was in the bathtub ring. She can laugh. But anyway, if y'all just Google bathtub ring Meredith College, you'll see that it is a small a cappella voice group where everyone wears overalls.
There's nothing quite like the formative experience of the private women's college, and I think that for me too, and as a creative person, I'm delighted to hear you talk about it. There's so much there. It's Phyllis Schlafly spoke at Meredith. You know, it's very unusual, and I think. And I hope you'll write about it sometime.
Yeah,
and
maybe I will.
I think you should if you feel so inspired to do, because it's a part of that Southern, you know, female white kind of experience. And there's a lot of class, and because of the rural and Italy, we called it the MRS degree. That's what we were being trained for. And my cousin went there, and she got a degree in home economics.
Oh, wow.
So there's the whole thing we're talking about here that's very niche, but I say it in the broader context of it shapes you as a woman, as a person, as a white woman in the South. And yet it's really an unusual and extraordinary experience to be a part of.
Yes.
Delighted to talk to you about it. Thanks for talking about it.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for asking me.
Well, thank you all again. And we'll go ahead and wrap up. And I want to thank the audience again for joining us this evening. We know that there's lots competing with your attention, and we really appreciate you coming out to support these authors and to support Malaprops. And we are, and Ashleigh, thank you for sharing your thoughts on Zoom. It's challenging, and it's not necessarily what we want to do is just have people come to the bookstore and hear authors and hang out with authors and be able to get their book signed. We can't do that, so we're grateful to be able to do this. And we're grateful to all the authors who push back all of the challenges to do it with us. So thanks so much to both of you, to Ashleigh Bryant Phillips and to Juliet Escoria. This was a wonderful conversation. We really appreciate it. And thanks again to the audience. And if you have any final words, now's the time. And then we'll say goodnight.
Well, thank you guys too.
Yeah, thank y'all so much.
It was my pleasure. Thank you
and
so
Julia,
much.
those are such good questions.
Oh, thank you.
It was a wonderful conversation. Yeah, great questions, great answers, and just a great time. So we really appreciate it. I'll say goodnight to everybody, and we'll look forward to hopefully seeing some of you again at another event. Please check those out on our website at malaprops.com. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate it.
Good night.
Good night.
Have a